As a beacon of democracy and a buffer against the communist rule on its northern border, South Korea is a key strategic partner for Western countries like our own. But that democracy hung by a thread this evening. Its president, out of nowhere, tried to impose martial law in a reminder of the country's authoritarian leaders of the 1980s. President Yoon Suk-yeol claimed anti-state forces among MPs are North Korean sympathizers, suspended parliament and called in the army. Control of the country swung to and fro in a night of political drama as MPs voted to lift martial law. Before dawn, President Yoon said he would. The sun has just risen in the capital, Seoul. The troops have dispersed, but the underlying hostility between president and parliament is certainly not.
These were the dramatic scenes at South Korea's parliament after the country's president declared martial law. Hundreds of protesters who'd gathered to show their opposition were met by security forces. Military helicopters were deployed above the assembly building soon after the announcement. In a surprise late-night TV address, South Korea's President Yoon claimed the move was necessary to protect the country from North Korea's communist forces and eliminate anti-state elements. But the fury of those who saw it as the actions of a lame duck president was clear. Protesters piled into the assembly building, chanting for him to be arrested. All the members present voted to reject the declaration. Outside, demonstrators stood their ground against military might, and just 2 hours later, martial law was no more. Back before the cameras with the most humiliating of U-turns for a president who looked powerless, announcing the standing down of military forces. In Washington and other capitals, there was grave concern.
It's interesting that in all of this, the United States has been remarkably silent. If in fact it were the case that there was a direct threat to South Korea from the north, then I think you would have seen a very different reaction from Washington. But sensibly, Washington, I think, has felt the need to remain relatively muted in terms of their public response to see what would happen in terms of the domestic political situation.
South Korea has been a stable liberal democracy for more than 4 decades, and the threat of martial law triggered a fight to protect that. Things like this should never happen, this protester says. It feels like we are returning to the era of dictatorship. After watching the news, I felt anxious and thought this is a national shame. With massive military forces facing each other across the tense Korean border, missteps like today send shockwaves across the region. But in the end, the president was undone by people power. Neil Connery, News at 10.